So the whole point of this class, or this succession of classes, okay, is we're arguing for the existence of God, okay. Now, can we do it? Can we do that with the Bible? Sure. Right. But what we're doing here is arguing through reason and logic. Okay? Not always. It's not like we're always going to be doing that. Tonight we are, for the existence of God. How do we know that God exists if we didn't have a Bible? You know, I know in Romans it says, you know, Paul talks about just look up. Just look up. And that's kind of what we're doing tonight, actually. Because we're gonna start off this series of apologetics with probably the most is it indefensible or undefensible? Indefensible? Indefensible, right? With one of the most indefensible arguments for the existence of a God. Theism. I'm starting off with, okay, here's a creator. Now, after we prove that, what kind of creator do we have? Who is this creator? And the whole point of the courses that we're doing afterwards is go, okay, there is a creator. There's an uncaused being, as I should say, tonight. We're making the case for an uncaused being, okay? And then through the course through these courses, making our way to what kind of creator is this? Who is this creator? And so as we make this journey through these classes and so forth, I'm going to make the case to get us to the God that we do believe in, right? That means making our way to Jesus. Okay? So that's the whole point of this. Now, understand that through your course of relationships and so forth, you're going to come across people that are not believers, even atheists that don't believe in anything. Let's even go to nihilists, right? That don't believe in anything. And how do you talk to these people and when it comes to understanding if there is a God or not?
I actually was friends with an atheist for years. We've had some pretty intense discussions.
Yep.
So later on I'll share that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start off. So tonight we're going to be talking about what's called the Kalam cosmological argument. This is actually an old argument, but it's been revitalized in the past 40, 50 years.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to have an argument, please.
Certainly, sir. Have you been here before?
No, this is my first time.
I see. Do you want to have the full argument, or were you thinking of taking a course?
Well, what would be the cost?
Well, yes, it's £1 for a 5-minute argument, but only £8 for a course of 10.
Well, I think it's probably best if I start with the one and see how it goes from there, okay?
Fine. I'll see who's free at the moment. Mr. Dubake is free, but he's a little bit conciliatory. Yes, sir. Try Mr. Barnard, room 12.
Thank you. Is this the right room for an argument?
I've told you once.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have.
When?
Just now.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
I did.
You didn't.
I'm telling you, I did.
You did not.
Oh, sorry. Is this a 5-minute argument or the full half hour?
Oh, just the 5-minute one.
Fine. Thank you. Anyway, I did.
You most certainly did not.
Now, let's get one thing quite clear. I most definitely told you.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.
It is. You just contradicted me.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you did.
No.
You did just then.
No, nonsense.
Oh, look, this is futile.
No, it isn't.
I came here for a good argument.
No, you didn't. You came here for an argument.
Well, an argument's not the same as contradiction.
Can be.
No, it can't. An argument's a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. It isn't just contradiction.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. Argument's an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic gainsaying of anything the other person says.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Not at all.
No, look.
Thank you. Morning.
What?
That's it. Morning.
I was just getting interested.
Sorry, the 5 minutes is up.
That was never 5 minutes just now.
I'm afraid it was.
No, it wasn't.
Sorry, I'm not allowed to argue anymore.
What?
If you want me to go on arguing, I'll have to pay for another 5 minutes.
But that was never 5 minutes just now. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous.
I'm very sorry, but I told you I'm not allowed to argue unless you pay.
Oh, all right. There you are.
Thank you.
Well,
Well, what?
that was never 5 minutes just
I
now.
told you I'm not allowed to argue unless you pay.
I just paid.
No, you didn't.
I did. I did. I don't want to argue about that.
Well, I'm very sorry, but you didn't pay.
Aha! Well, if I didn't pay, why are you arguing? Gotcha.
There you have it.
Is that? If you're arguing, I must have paid.
Not necessarily. I could be arguing in my spare time.
I've had enough of this.
No, you haven't.
Oh, shut up.
All right. Obviously, I like a little bit of humor, right? So before we get into this argument, because that's what we're really talking about, we have to define what an argument is, okay? And the kind of argument that we're talking about here tonight is in the classic sense, in the philosophical sense, okay? So arguing is essentially coming up with a truth claim, making that truth claim into steps to reach a logical conclusion, okay? So the most classical sense of an argument here usually involves a premise or two, a couple premises, sometimes more than two premises, it doesn't matter, whatever the steps are to reach a logical conclusion. So, you know, I've written here a set of statements called premises used to support a claim. That's the truth claim that you're making, okay? And the argument attempts to establish a logical connection between them to get to a final conclusion, okay? And it's important to reach those steps logically, all right? So I have this example up here. I've kind of tweaked Aristotle's one of the most famous arguments. All humans are mortal, okay? Now, if all humans are mortal is untrue, we're not going to reach a logical conclusion here. If we point holes or pick holes into that claim, we've got a problem. So all humans are mortal. Premise 2, Pastor James is a human. At least I think so. Now, if you can poke some holes in that, then I definitely have a problem. Therefore, conclusion, right? Therefore, Pastor James is mortal. Now, these premises, these are your evidence for the argument. Okay, these are used as evidence. What we usually call this is a syllogism. Okay, the syllogism is the simplest sequence of logical premises and conclusions. All right. So like I said, if you pick holes into any of these premises, your conclusion is going to be either A, true, or false, right? It can't be either. Does that make any sense? So the goal of the syllogism is to arrange premises so that only one true conclusion is possible. That's what we're trying to get to, okay? All right. So here it is in all its glory, the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, you can see the syllogism here. It's two premises with one conclusion, okay? And this is, in a classic sense, called, we're reaching this argument to conclusion through deduction. All right, deductive reasoning. All right, so everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, proponents of this argument argue that the cause of the universe must be a transcendent or uncaused and powerful entity, often identified as God. Right? We can kind of logically make our way to that inferment. Right? So the Kalam cosmological argument. Why is it called Kalam cosmological argument? So Kalam actually. So this argument actually is actually really old. It came out of actually Islam. All right. Kalam just means speech or discourse. Okay. And it focuses on a rational defense of religious beliefs. Al-Ghazali is that figure on the top. He's most notably known in bringing out this syllogism, this idea. And then I talked about it being revitalized within the past 50 years, and that, or 30 or 40 years, by Dr. William Lane Craig down there on the bottom. Okay, his books are all over the place. There is a specific book by him on the Kalam cosmological argument. That was actually his thesis. So he's been teaching and making this argument and so forth for a long time. But this argument is very old. It's about 1,500 years old. Okay. Well, not 1,500, maybe about 1,000. Sorry. 12th century. There we go. 12th century. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break down these premises, okay? And really get to the meat and potatoes of this argument. So premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now, this premise is grounded on the principle of causality. So what do I mean by that? It means that we argue from effect to cause. And usually that's what scientists do as well with the scientific method. They see something has happened, and why has that happened? So we see that this has happened, let's figure out why that has happened and move from that to what caused that thing to happen. Or in this case, what caused this thing to exist. All right? So a lot of times with apologists, most of the time we're arguing from effect to cause. And it's probably the most effective way to make a case or to make a truth claim known to people, all right? To be able to argue that truth claim. We argue from effect to cause. So, for example, you have a piece of art hanging in. We have this piece of art right over here, right? We know that this piece of art exists because an artist made it, right? We're sitting in this building right here, and we know that this building exists because a carpenter built it. Okay? Effect to cause. Now, the most important part of this premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause, is begins to exist. Okay, understand this. Begins to exist is the most important of this premise. Because here's the question. A lot of people are going to try to pick holes in this premise simply by asking or claiming that everything has a cause or nothing has a cause, okay? But we're just going to focus on begins to exist, all right? Now, this is claiming that only things that have a beginning exist, okay? So having this premise in mind, we're really starting to just make sure we avoid any question of what caused God. That's not what the premise is making. It's just anything that begins to exist has a cause. We'll get to that a little bit later. All right? We're not allowing the possibility of an uncaused or eternal entity. All right, so let's take a look at some of the support for this. So intuitive reasoning is one, right? In our experience in life, right, things don't just all of a sudden just pop up in front of you unexpectedly without any reason or anything, right? You know, I mean, I'm sitting in my backyard one day and I'm sipping on some iced tea and everything, and boom, out of nowhere, an elm tree just pops into existence right there in front of me, right? Does that happen? So intuitive reasoning here, right? Things just don't pop into existence out of nowhere, right? There's a cause. There's a cause for a tree, okay? That cause is somebody had to plant it and grow and help it to grow. Or, another tree dropped seeds, and those seeds got into the ground, rain, earth, everything. There's all kinds of things that came into place to cause that tree to exist, right? Okay. All right, so metaphysical principle. Anybody know what metaphysics are? Have you ever heard of that word? So metaphysics is simply, it's the philosophical study of what exists. It's about the nature of reality, okay? It's about fundamental questions about existence. This is how we think about reality. This is how we think about why things exist. We ask these questions about existence. That is metaphysical. It's about exploring what things are, how they relate to each other, what it means for something to be real. So when we talk about metaphysics, that's what we're talking about. How do we make that connection? How do we understand how this pertains to reality? Okay? So why is this important, this metaphysical principle? And the reason why it's important that we understand the metaphysical principle is because denying this principle will lead to absurdities, such as uncaused events happening randomly, right? We know that a tree just doesn't sprout out of nowhere, boom, pop right into existence. We know that through metaphysical principle. Okay? That make sense? Okay. All right. Does anybody know, first of all, what language that is, and then translate it?
It's Greek to me.
Oh, okay. If anybody has any questions, just grab that microphone and speak into it.
If this is being recorded, people online can't hear you
Yeah.
if you're not using the microphone.
That's okay.
It's something to the effect that things don't come from nothing.
Very good, Linda. So nihil,
Yes.
nihil. I mean, you've seen this. You've seen this word in some language before. How about annihilate? What does annihilate mean? To make nothing. To make something, to make nothing. That's really essentially what annihilate means. Nihilist. Have you ever heard? You know what a nihilist is? Nihilism.
Something that somebody that believes that will cease to exist or something like that.
Believes in nothing. Somebody who believes in nothing. Nothing. Right? So ex nihilo nihil fit is simply out of nothing, nothing comes. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Okay? Why is this important? Because without a cause, there's no explanation for why something exists rather than nothing. That's simply what it is. We know this. We intuitively know this, that something cannot come from nothing. Okay? All right, let's take a look at premise 2. The universe began to exist. Now, atheists, they really like to tackle this one. They really, really like to put holes into this premise here. All right? Because if they can get the universe to exist or it be eternal, right, then there's no need for a God, right? So they're really going to try to tackle this one. They've done a pretty good job at it, but we've done a pretty good job of defending this one too. All right. Now, this premise makes the assertion that the universe is not eternal and has a starting point. The universe began to exist. All right. So we're going to try to look at some different reasons or different support systems for this premise here. First of all is the philosophical support. So in order for people to believe that the universe is eternal, that it always was here, right? They would need to establish some kind of infinitude. That means an infinite past. Now, we can kind of grasp the understanding of an infinitive future, right? As Christians, we believe in a future that's infinite, right? I always use that example of a ray, where it's a dot with a line that goes straight with an arrow, right? It never ends. We can grasp that idea, right? Because we have a starting point, the dot, right? So there are people that try to poke a hole into the universe began to exist simply by understanding or making the assertion that not only is infinity into the future, but infinity to the past. Now, why does that sound absurd? Because it is absurd. It simply is absurd, because if your past is infinite, right, then how do we get here today, now? Okay? So this creates what we call a paradox. And the definition up there I put up is a paradox really brings something very illogical. It brings out something that's contradictory. And like I said, the word I like to use is absurd, right? And that's why I asked the question, if the past is infinite, if it's just a series of events that regress, how do we arrive at today? It's impossible. It's an absurdity. Okay? So think of it this way. Lego blocks. My boys love Legos. If I take a bunch of Legos and I stack Legos on top of each other, right? Now, if I have an infinite amount of Legos, I can stack an infinite amount of Legos upward, on and on and on. The only reason why I can do that is because it has a starting block. If I have an infinite regression or an infinite pass, how do those Legos stack on top of each other? Does that make sense? Okay. It's hard to understand. But that is what they would like to try to do to negate the idea that the universe actually began to exist. Because allowing that premise to stand infers to a creator, a God. Okay? Hilbert's Hotel. David Hilbert, philosopher and famous mathematician, actually really good friends with Albert Einstein. He came up with this thought exercise of in infinite rooms in a hotel. Okay? I'll let Dr. Craig explain why it's important that we understand Hilbert's Hotel and what that means.
When you mentioned an actually infinite number of things cannot exist, you mentioned Hilbert's Hotel.
Yes.
Could you explain that example and what that is and how that relates
Yes,
to God
I'll try
and his
to do this
infinity?
very briefly. David Hilbert was perhaps the greatest mathematician of the 20th century. And to illustrate the strange nature of the actual infinite, he invites us to imagine a hotel that has an infinite number of rooms in it. Moreover, he says, imagine that every room is occupied. Now, you have to have that firmly in mind. There is a flesh and blood person in every single room throughout the infinite hotel. Now, Hilbert says, suppose somebody shows up at the guest registry wanting to check in. The proprietor says, of course, no problem. And he moves the person who was in room 1 into room 2. The person who was in room 2, he puts in room 3. The person who was in room 3, he puts in room 4, on out to infinity. As a result, room 1 now becomes vacant, and the new person is easily accommodated. And yet, before he came, all the rooms were already full. Then Hilbert says, imagine that an infinite number of new guests show up at the front desk, and again, every room is already occupied. No problem, says the manager. And he moves the guest in room 1 into room 2. He moves the guest who was in room 2 into room 4. He takes the guest who was in room 3 and puts him in room 6, putting every guest in the room number double his own. Well, since any number multiplied by 2 is always an even number, right? All of the odd-numbered rooms become vacant, and therefore the infinity of new guests is easily accommodated. And yet before they arrived, every room was already full. I think these sorts of absurdities show the impossibility of the existence of an actually infinite number of things, because there's nothing about the illustration that hangs on it being a hotel. When you have an actual infinite, you generate these kinds of crazy situations that I think are plausibly metaphysically impossible.
See some hamsters turning. Definitely makes you think. The whole point of understanding why Hilbert's Hotel is used is the fact that when it comes to infinity, you're using something to poke a hole in the premise that the universe began to exist. That's extremely absurd. It doesn't work. Nice try, but it doesn't work. Again, the universe began to exist. How do we know the universe began to exist? Now, we already talked about a um, philosophical argument for the universe began to exist. How about a science one? Let's take a look at the scientific support. Now, for those that still believe that that science and the church are at odds, think again. Think again. The reason that science, that we know so much about science and the scientific method and the support of science was because of the church, was because of this man who came into existence over 2,000 years ago, that through glorifying who he is, that we became interested in learning what is this world we live in and what's outside of it, right? So, Newton, Sir Isaac Newton, the father of physics, essentially, Galileo, all of these famous scientists and so forth were constantly trying to find out about this world and the reality that we live in to glorify him and him alone. Okay? So science and the church is not at odds. Now, I will also say another thing about science, because people tell us all the time we need to listen to the science, and I'll tell you quite clearly that science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Okay? So let's just put that one to bed. All right. So how do we know that the universe began to exist? So we look at, here we go, Big Bang cosmology. Now, the first time I heard, first of all, cosmology. We're not talking about skincare, makeup, or anything, right? Cosmology is simply the scientific study of the universe and how did the universe come into existence. That's what cosmology is. Okay. So Big Bang cosmology. Now, the first time I heard about the Big Bang, I was like, ooh, that sounds quite at odds with Christianity. But I remember quite clearly that there are plenty of verses, right, that support the idea of Big Bang. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. John 1:3. Colossians 1:16-7. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Psalm 102, of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. So the standard model of cosmology suggests that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Yes, microphone. Yeah, just so we can hear that question.
Okay, the scriptures that you read,
Yeah.
How they get the Big Bang out of that?
Yeah, we're going to get to that because we're talking
Oh,
about.
I'm ahead of you?
It's all right because we're going to what caused this. So the Big Bang, it's believed, and there's tons of scientific study out there. Matter of fact, most atheists and so forth really don't even try to destroy the Big Bang theory. Now, there are some people out there, Stephen Hawking, before he died, tried to create or understand a universe that was eternal, but then it got reduced and into a singularity and then recreated again in another from a singularity. Crazy stuff. I'm not going to go far into the weeds here on this stuff, but the fact of the matter is that most scientific studies believe that this is the standard model. All right? So why is the Big Bang important? Because it implies a finite past. This is why I was trying to get you to understand that an infinite past destroys any kind of conclusion here that we're trying to make. Scientifically, the Big Bang creates a finite past, a starting point. A begins to exist. Right? That make sense? Okay. Now, we're still on premise 2. The universe began to exist, right? So we've established the Big Bang. Now, I don't know where your theology is on time and creation and all that stuff. We're not talking about that right now, okay? We're just trying to reach a logical conclusion, right? All right. Scientific support number 2, the second law of thermodynamics. Okay. So essentially, the second law of thermodynamics is just understanding that the universe is running out of usable energy. Okay. So a lot of energy to create the universe, and then as the universe grows and so forth, that energy kind of disperses and kind of goes all chaotic and so forth. Now, we see this happen all the time. The second law of thermodynamics. Does anybody have an example of what maybe the second law of thermodynamics actually looks like? How about you get a nice glass of iced tea and you put some ice in there? What happens to the ice? It melts, right? So it melts into a liquid state. A gas molecule, as burning wood releases energy, right? Products of combustion, like CO2, have what we call entropy, higher entropy than the wood itself. Now, entropy is just simply this, this disorder or random that happens with the energy. Got my engineer over there. He understands the second law of thermodynamics, I'm sure. Am I right? I'm right. Yeah. So entropy is just this energy just disperses in a chaotic and randomness as that energy starts to run out, okay? Why is the second law of thermodynamics important to understand? Because that energy had a starting point. And because of that randomness and that entropy, that displacement of energy and so forth, right? That means that that energy had a starting point. Also, if the universe was always here, if it was eternal, that it didn't have a beginning point, then we would have reached absolute entropy a long time ago, meaning we would have no more energy going on in the universe. Yes, ma'am. Microphone.
Have the microphone.
So would that be, I'm actually learning a lot in the last 5 minutes because I never put the Big Bang Theory with biblical truth. So there. So would that be like a baseball player hits the ball with the bat?
Mm-hmm.
So the energy is in the ball when the bat hits it, and the farther the ball goes, the slower it gets because it's losing energy. Is that, I mean.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
well,
trying to think
yeah,
of,
in a
like,
potential energy way. Yeah, it starts to lose potential energy, right?
yep,
Because potential energy is the ball hitting the bat and making it go, right? And then so atmosphere, air molecules, they slow down the ball. The ball has friction. It heats up. It starts to lose its potential energy, and then it starts to drop off, right?
right.
So in essence,
Innocent, okay, okay.
I think you
I'm sort
can-
of trying to make it
Yep.
make sense in my head, so
Yep.
that's,
So I like the idea of an ice cube or an ice block, right?
Yeah.
That eventually its energy that is stored in the ice is going to go into something else. It's going to liquefy, right? The energy inside the molecules and so forth start to slow down? They start to randomly uncluster, right? So, and that's what we're trying to get at. It's the second law of thermodynamics. There's a randomness of its structure, its energy source that dissipates and so forth.
And it's dissipating in a spherical.
Yeah, and it's random.
Right.
Yeah, there's no direction to that dissipation. Okay.
So does that also,
Yeah, it's
when you take water and you put it in the freezer and it freezes,
uh-huh.
is that the same thing?
Well, it's definitely water is going to a different state. It's decreasing in entropy, meaning that its energy is actually speeding up and clustering together. I think. That sound about right? Yeah. So the point of the second law of thermodynamics that I'm trying to make with the universe is that in order for so you have this dispersion of energy that's decreasing. Okay? That means that energy had to start somewhere. It's at a starting point. Okay? And the other thing is, point 2, is that for those who think that the universe was always here, that it was eternal, if that was true, you can't deny the second law of thermodynamics. Okay? So if the universe was always here, it was eternal, it's eternal, then all of that energy would be gone by now. It would be impossible for all of that energy to still exist. Does that make sense? I know that's a tough one, but it's important. And then to back that up in another sense is this theorem that came out in 2003, Board, Guth, and Vilenkin. Any universe that is expanding cannot have an infinite past and must have a beginning. We know that the universe expands. It's getting bigger, right? Which implies that if it's getting bigger, then it had to start smaller. It had to have a starting point. Okay? Again, the premise is the universe began to exist. It had to start from somewhere, from something, not from nothing. Good? All right. We're getting there. All right. So we've reached the conclusion. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And what do we mean by cause? We mean that something created it, not from nothing, right? Something started that ball rolling, right? Now, we kind of already head down the road of, well, this sounds a lot like God, right? Through our relationship with God, through our study of God, and understanding who He is. All right. But what kind of cause, right? So what kind of cause created the universe? Well, it has to be something that is timeless. All right? Why would it have to be timeless? for something to cause the universe to exist, why would that thing have to be timeless? So let's think about the universe. If the universe started, so all the laws of science, everything that we know that's material and so forth, right? That began to exist with the universe. That means time began with the universe. So before the universe existed, did time exist?
I'm just kidding.
So,
Yeah.
so you're talking A theory and B theory?
Well, not necessarily.
No?
Time is a construct of the universe, right?
Well, you could argue that time is a construct that we came up with. I mean, yeah, I think I see what you're saying.
Well, we know time as something that happens because the rotation of our planet and the gravitational pull of the sun spins at a certain amount of time, and it takes and it creates this knowledge of being able to measure something, right? It's measurable,
Right.
which is a law of physics, which would be something in this universe. So in order for time to exist through the creation of the universe, then the thing that created the universe would have to be outside of time, would have to be timeless.
So I'll jump ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters.
Yeah, and as you go on, when
Yeah.
you get to day 3, we talk about daytime, nighttime. Daytime,
Yeah.
nighttime.
Yeah.
What does that sound like? It sounds like chronology, right? It sounds like time.
Yep.
Yep. All right. Spaceless. Why would this creator of sorts have to be spaceless? Well, it implies something that's non-physical. We're talking about something, so when I say spaceless, we're talking about something that's non-physical, right? It's
Well, God hovered over the, the face of the deep. I mean,
amazing, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. So since space began with the universe, right? Things began to exist with the universe. The creator has to be outside of space in order to create those things. Okay? So immaterial, what you're talking about, how I look at that verse and everything, is spiritual, not physical, right? Him hovering over the water is spiritual, making the material the physical. That makes sense? This creator would have to be immensely powerful to be able to create all of this power and energy in order to create the universe. Something so vast to us right now. But the most important aspect I like to think about when it comes to what are the properties of this creator is the idea that that creator has to be personal. All right? And what do I mean that? I mean a personal agent with free will that can choose to create. Okay? Now, some people would align these attributes with the concept of God. Many theistic traditions, right?
Your Honor, I object!
And why is that, Mr. Reed?
Because it's devastating to my case!
Overruled.
Good call!
Can I insert a little humor here? So with that understanding, let's talk about some objections to these premises, okay? So common objections. Quantum physics. And I don't have the time or energy to try to understand quantum physics and mechanics to really explain it to you, because I really don't fully explain it either, or fully understand it either. All right? But quantum mechanics has demonstrated that particles can appear without cause. These are called virtual particles. Scientists will throw that out. Now, we're also talking about a particle which suddenly appears for like not even a split second and disappears again. Now, would this undermine premise number one? Right? Remember I said premise number one is everything that begins to exist has a cause. Right? Would that undermine it? No. And my objection is simply that we understand that quantum events occur within a framework of physical laws, space, and time. It's already in the construct. These particles do not come from nothing, no thing. It's already here in the material. It's already created. Okay? Good? Okay. All right. So, common objection. What caused God? Did somebody create God? Or our understanding of God? Now, don't get thrown off on this, because they really, if God is uncaused, why can't the universe be uncaused, is what they're really trying to aim at here, to try to destroy this premise. If God is uncaused, why can't the universe be uncaused? Interesting question. Now, remember premise one. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. We're only applying to things that begin to exist. Okay? We know God as eternal. He is uncaused. Now, somebody that wants to throw this question out of what caused God, or if God is uncaused, why can't the universe be uncaused? That's not what we're talking about in this argument. But I'll get to that in a minute. I'll equip you with a little bit of that afterwards. But we are only applying things that begin to exist. God, as an eternal and uncaused being, does not require a cause. So let's think about this for a minute. Okay. So what I'm really trying to get at when we talk about God as uncaused, meaning, did somebody create God? Well, that would be kind of illogical in a sense, because what we're trying to get to is what we call a first cause. All right? It has to start somewhere. All right, so think about this. Let's say you're in a room and there is nothing inside this room at all. Not a single thing. It's just a room, completely empty, except it's got a row of dominoes neatly lined up in that room, okay? Now, we've already talked about infinite regression, right? We've destroyed the whole idea of the past being infinite. And here's a good illustration of that. If I'm one of those dominoes, and if regression or the past is infinite, then I will never get knocked down. Okay? Because something didn't knock down the domino. Now, if I get knocked down, right, there's a cause for that to happen. Another domino hit me, and I fell down. Now there's another cause for the domino in front of it to fall down because I knocked it over. Does that make sense? So now we're trying to get to first cause. If there's nothing in that room, right, there's not going to be any kind of earthquake. There's not going to be any kind of wind or anything to knock over that first domino. Nothing can knock over that first domino unless I, with my will, decide to go up and knock that first domino down. What am I talking about? I'm talking about something personal. With my will, I knock that domino down. I'm the first cause. Okay? Now think about it this way. If God is the first cause to say, let there be light, right? And the universe created, started from a singularity or whatever you want to call it. And somebody says, well, who created God? Okay, well, let's ask this. What you're really asking me then is, who is the first God or who is the true God? Because we can't keep going down this infinite regression. That's an absurdity. There has to be one first cause that starts everything. Does that make sense? It shoots in the foot the idea that somebody created God. God is uncaused because he is the first cause, the creator of everything.
So he is the only one that is existing at the time when he spoke, let there be light.
Well, in this argument, that's where we're at. We will go down that road later on to the three of them. Okay? We'll eventually get to the Trinity. But for right now, we're arguing for a first cause, a creator, what we would ascribe to as God. Okay? And a theist understanding. Okay?
Okay.
Doesn't matter what religion you are right now. That's what we're just arguing right now is a first cause, a creator of everything. Okay?
That's where I'm getting mixed up.
Yep.
What you just said.
Yep.
I don't understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Bonnie is saying that she was getting confused because she has the Trinity in mind. And right now, we're not arguing the Trinity. We're just arguing for the existence of a creator, a first cause creator. That's all we're doing here tonight.
So James, the question that comes to my mind is, is there ever after that? Is there ever any other first cause for something, or?
Well, remember, we argue from effect to cause, right? Mm-hmm. If God is the first cause of the universe,
yeah,
right? Then there's effect after effect after effect after effect after effect. That's where we're at, right?
Okay. So there's really only ever one first cause.
Yes.
Okay.
Take anything. Let's say, how did this ant come into creation? Well, the ant became had a mommy and daddy aunt, and and so forth, and then it lives on this planet, and then this planet was created, and then this planet is in this universe, and these stars were created in this galaxy, and and we're going to go back and back and back to this ant was created because first cause.
Okay.
God created it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. And the common objection, the universe could be eternal. We kind of talked about this, right? I had mentioned Stephen Hawking. Now, eternal models, when they're talking about the universe, they've come up with models like multiverses and so forth. Well, not even multiverse. So multiverse theories. Have you ever heard of multiverse? Do you know what a multiverse is? It's like universes within universes within universes. Like there could be infinite number of, Brian and Lori and I, everybody sitting here at the same time, dressed in different clothes, doing different things. It's an absurdity. That's what it is. Okay, is that real? There are models out there for multiverses, and even some philosophers like to argue against theist ideas with multiverse. Again, it's an absurdity. But here's the point: that you can digress from that multiverse and say, okay, all right, I understand what you're saying, but what caused that multiverse? If there's multiverses, then what caused those universes? All right? That's where we're at. We get down to first cause. Now, you'll have some people that will say the cause isn't necessarily God. Well, you'll have the video to watch over and over again if you want to. But yeah, this is a lot, right? Yes. I'm really trying to, bring it down to a level that I can try to understand and hopefully try to help you to understand this as well. But there's a point to all of this, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So you can say that the cause isn't necessarily God. Even if the universe has a cause, why call it God? It could be a naturalistic phenomenon like a multiverse, right? And what did I say? Even that's going to have a first cause. Okay? So I got a couple of videos to end this that I think help bring this perspective a little bit more. Has anybody heard of this guy, J. Warner Wallace? He's a retired L.A. cop. He's a cold case detective for many years. He's actually on Dateline, with different cases and so forth. But he was a very good cold case detective, so forth. He was an atheist until about 35 years old. And because of his background in police work and everything, he logically came to the realization of God, to Christ, and then gave his heart to the Lord. He's an amazing speaker. If you ever have a chance, go online to Cold Case Christianity. His books are really good as well, and he's a wonderful speaker.
What is his name?
J. Warner Wallace, James Warner Wallace. Cold Case Christianity. I would highly recommend that you listen, look up some of his material. He's very good.
My mom came to me recently and said that her junior hire had asked this question: if God is the creator of everything, well, who created God? Now, whether that son of hers got this from the internet or from a friend, or maybe just thought this question up on his own, I think it's an important question that needs to be answered. In some ways, I told her, I said, this is really a definition problem, right? Our definition of God is the uncreated creator of the universe. So to ask the question, who created the uncreated creator, is kind of like asking, what sound does silence make?
First
Or-
cause, right?
Do you see what I'm saying? It's the definition of silence that precludes us from asking the question. And that is really what we're doing here when we ask the question, who created the uncreated creator of the universe? But in some ways, this didn't seem satisfying to her. And I don't think it'll be satisfying probably to her son either. What really the question here seems to be is that, well, do we as Christians have a problem in grounding our beliefs in a God that is uncreated? And does the atheist have a better answer for this? Well, I'll tell you, as a non-believer, and I was a non-believer till I was 35, I also believed in an uncreated creator. Maybe it was the multiverse generator. Maybe it was some quantum environment in which our universe emerged spontaneously. Regardless of what it was that caused the universe, as an atheist, I would have told you that that thing was uncreated. So it turns out everyone believes there's an uncreated creator. The only real question is whether that uncreated creator is personal or impersonal. Is it a force of physics, an eternal force of physics, or is it an eternal personal being? So in the end, don't think that your belief in an uncreated creator is somehow less substantiated or invalid compared to the others. Everyone believes in an uncreated creator. But it turns out your definition, if you're a Christian, in thinking that that uncreated creator is a being, could also account for the fine-tuning we see in the universe, the information we see in DNA, the appearance of design we see in biology, even the personal moral obligations we feel as humans here in the universe. So as it turns out, our definition as a personal creator is far more satisfying than the others. And that's why I believe, yes, there is an uncreated personal creator.
That's why I always say that that atheists don't actually believe in that God doesn't exist. They do. They just choose not to call it God. They just choose not to call it God.
Because we feel there has to be a first cause.
So I wanted to kind of wrap this all up, and what does this really mean? Why is it? How can this be important? How can this be important to know, for everyday life, or just you're hanging out with friends, and how does this relate to you personally or interpersonally, right? So I found this wonderful video, and I just love how he just puts it all together and makes it so realistic for us to understand.
I was sitting somewhat recently, in the last maybe 10 years or so, I was sitting with my sister in her apartment in Boston with her boyfriend, now fiance, and their best friends. And one of them asked me the question I love getting. It's the best question anybody can ask me. It's what evidence led you to believe God exists? Well, my response to them was three questions actually. I asked, do things exist to them? Do you think things exist? And their response, of course things exist. Do you think things that exist have always existed? Well, I don't think so. They said, looking around the room, you could point to the table or the cat. You could point to the car outside. You could point to the paintings on the wall or the television on the bureau. Have these things always existed? No, I don't think so. Well, then the third question is, what caused them to come into existence? And when I was sitting with my sister and her friends, I was met with silence. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a philosopher. I don't know these things. I don't know. But rationally, there's only really two choices, right? Everything either has to come from something or no thing, if you think about it, right? And who in his rational rights has the right to say nothing caused the world. Even if it's possible, what's most reasonable? You see, this puts the atheist in a very interesting place because they don't want to say something caused the universe, because the minute they do, their naturalism is dead. This is where I started as a naturalist, because I tried to explain the existence of the stuff, and I didn't have anything available to me to adequately explain it. And if I appealed to something caused the universe, that something had to have certain qualities in order to create everything, right? That something had to be powerful. It had to be creative. It had to exist outside of time, space. It had to be immaterial. And before I knew it, and before the atheist knows it, that something that they want to posit as the creator of the universe starts to look an awful lot like the G word. And they don't want to say that word. That's the bad word. God. And so instead, to avoid the G word, at least for me, I'd want to posit the nothing option. But as I pressed into it and tried to learn from the world around me, it seems like this was really unreasonable. And here's the main point to the bump of stuff here. I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to argue that it's impossible to get something from nothing. I think it is impossible to get something from nothing, but I don't have to do that with the naturalist. Keep in mind, it's the atheist or the naturalist, the materialist, who wants to trade unreasonable. After all, we're the unreasonable ones. The Christians are the unreasonable ones. At least that's what I used to say. You are the unreasonable one. I'm a purveyor of reason. According to me as an atheist, and according to them, they have the most reasonable position. So I'm just going to ask the atheist, what are the chances? What are the chances of nothing producing everything? And it's like this. This is the way I think of it. It's like, think of your dream car, right? Mine right now currently happens to be the Tesla X. Like, I would love to be able to buy my wife a Tesla X. Those cars are so sweet. And imagine if you came home, or if I came home and packed in my driveway after a long day of work is a brand new mirror black Tesla X. It's wrapped in a bow and it has my name on one of those huge big name tags, John. And then I walk inside and my wife's in here and she's prepping the meal, and I say, babe, did you see that car on the driveway? It's so cool. It's amazing. Thank you so much. Where'd you get it? Can we afford it? And she's like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, well, there's a car in the driveway. Where'd it come from? Oh, it just appeared out of nowhere. It was crazy. It was the craziest thing. Stuff like that happens all the time. Stuff like that never happens. Things like that don't happen all the time. Nothing comes from nothing. If things came from nothing, then science itself would be impossible. Now, as I'm talking about this, I know that you guys are starting to recognize it. This is the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God. It's just when I was wrestling with it as an atheist, I didn't know it had a formal meaning, or a formal name, rather. And when I say nothing, I want to talk about nothing for a minute, because sometimes this word's been called into question. When I say nothing, I don't mean the so-called nothing of Lawrence Krauss. I'm not talking about a quantum vacuum. Even that, though, had to come into existence from somewhere, right? Major scientists, Board, Guth, Vilenkin, they've all written on this. When I say nothing, what I mean is the universal negation, no thing. It's that which rocks dream about, is what I'm talking about. That's largely accredited to, I think, Aristotle. I'm not sure if he really said it, though, but that's the nothing I'm talking about. The nothing option, and then we think about it, Kokel brings this up all the time. The nothing option is actually worse than magic. And oftentimes as an atheist, I used to say, oh, you're going to appeal to your magic now, right? It's a short, pithy thing to say to the Christian, right? It has rhetorical force behind. But when I started thinking about it, I'm like, wait a second, I'm the one appealing to something worse than magic, because at least on my position, I don't have when a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, he's got a magician, he's got himself, he's got the hat, he's got the rabbit. Well, on this view, on the nothing view, this is what Kokel says, he's got no hat, and he's got no magician either, just the rabbit, the universe, into existence out of nowhere. Is that reasonable? I don't know. Well, here's the main point to take away from the bump of stuff. Christianity has superior explanatory power when it comes to the existence of the world around us. And when I was honest with myself in pursuit of the answers to those big holy cow questions, my atheism, it just simply fell short, guys. Naturalism can't explain where stuff comes from. But Christian theism, it can. Not only that, it does so in a way that's consistent with our basic intuitions about reality, the world around us. The explanations Christianity and Christian theism they provide, they line up perfectly with the way things really are. And once my presuppositions of naturalism were dropped to the floor, and I availed myself to a supernatural explanation, I realized there was nowhere else to run. There's nowhere else to turn for answers. You know, all effects have causes adequate to explain them. Therefore, Christianity has better explanatory power when it comes to the existence of the universe.
Yeah, I love that. And the thing I like to point out to people, to Christians, is understanding one thing, that an atheist has to have more faith than you in their beliefs of nothing, no thing. Now, it's hard to wrap your mind around how vast and incredible the universe is, okay? But I don't think that holds a candle to trying to imagine no thing, nothing, nothing. The other thing I'd like to point out as well is that you have the truth claim. You have answers to what is reality. You have answers to all of these questions that just seem so crazy. You have a reasonable answer. Like he said, you are the reasonable one. You don't have to sit there and try to poke holes in their theory. You don't. So this is all I have for this month, the Kalam cosmological argument. Again, I said June 26th, Thursday, June 26th, we're going to meet. The next presentation that I will be giving is we'll be talking about what's called the fine-tuning argument. Right? So a little taste of that. Why is the Earth, what is it? 29, what's the angle? Forgot. Why is it at a certain degree angle? Right?
I think it's 7 degrees.
Yeah.
7, 8. I think it's less than 10. It's not much.
Right. Why is it set at such an angle? Why does it wobble back and forth as it travels around the planet? Why are we in such a specific zone where we can survive? Why is it that there are so many galaxies out there that don't have any planets that sit in this kind of zone to support life like ours? Why is it that the planets that have been seen in the universe by scientists have atmospheres where if you were on that planet, you wouldn't be able to see outside the atmosphere of space? Why is gravity so finely tuned to such a high number that if it was just off just one tiny bit, we'd all be crushed? So there will be a lot of science in the next one. I will try to bring it into some more relatable stories or concepts that we can imagine better, rather than sitting there talking about numbers that are 10 to the 40th power, which would be numbers like a lot of zeros, right? So the fine-tuning argument we'll be talking about, and making the assertion that if things are so finely tuned, then there had to be a fine tuner. Okay? So we'll see how long that one goes. We might have to split it up in two. I'm not sure, because there's a lot of stuff, or maybe I just tried to condense it as much as possible, and that you guys get enough interest in seeking out some of those things out there that are just so intriguing, and so forth. So, anybody have any questions? Questions? No?